pleasure to have Dr. David Wright on this podcast. And Dr. Wright, David, I must be honest, I have been drinking out of the proverbial fire hose, reading all of your stuff here as I prepared for this call, and I've loved it. So excited. Welcome to our show. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
That's good news. I appreciate you kind of waking up early for us. I'm on the East Coast. You're on the West Coast. Um, right balance. We'll talk about it a lot. But before we go there, tell our global audience a little bit about you, how you came to where you are also, please.
Well, I went to Southern California to play baseball at the age of 20.
Mm-hmm.
Never signed, went on to graduate school. I have a couple of PhDs,
Yeah.
research and biomechanics.
All right.
And I actually owned the first chronic pain and headache centers in Orange County,
Okay.
California.
Mm-hmm.
And that basically gave me an income to go and do what I loved. I always wanted to be in some sport. So I moved from baseball to golf. And I became a golf professional 1986. 92 began to do research on balance.
All right.
Early research was on grip size and looking at the impact handle size has on hip line, rotation of the hips, heel to toe balance.
Mm-hmm.
And was fortunate enough to meet Dr. Michael Immelman. Mickey Immelman was team physician for the Dodgers,
Mm-hmm.
Kings, the Rams, and obviously had a close relationship with Centinela Hospital. Dr. Frank Job, Dr. Job did the Tommy John surgery.
Mm-hmm.
So we set up and did a 3.5, 4 year research project in Dr. Job's lab.
All
We
right.
had 40 light sensors on the body and 1,000 sensors in each shoe. The entire study was about balance, and that's really where right balance comes from. Everything we do has to do with balance.
Well, look, it's one of the elements that I think probably 90%, if not more, of the audience watching or listening to this suffer. And folks, you can watch on YouTube if you go to markimmelman.com or just subscribe on YouTube. Uh, um, okay, so I have thousands of questions already, but I need to ask this one. Are you still actively giving golf lessons right now, or is it purely research based? Or you, because I know you have a bunch of instructors that can become right balance certified. So where are we now in the industry?
Well, I just relocated to the Pacific Northwest.
Uh,
And I have in Seattle, I have a facility there where I teach indoors.
mhm.
I also travel. Next month, I go to Naples to do training, professional training. We're in 16 countries. So I travel around the world. It's an online system
All right.
where professionals go online, enter certain body measurements, and out of that comes the balance information for their students.
Fantastic. Wow. I know a lot of folks are probably searching rightbalance.com as they listen to this. Folks, if you're driving, please keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road. Okay, let's dive into it. Now, I'm going to sound like a layman, so forgive me, but I'm a fan. And so I read a lot, but basically, if I understand correctly, your system, for lack of a better term, is broken down into three areas: the upper core, the middle core, and the lower core. And they essentially define one's ability to swing the golf club. So, if you will, let's tee it off by you sort of giving the 36,000-foot view of it before we delve into each area.
Okay. Well, the upper core play, it's about, if you consider it about balance,
Mm-hmm.
the upper core player plays on the balls of the feet.
Okay.
Now, as an aside, we are able, with the research we've done and an exercise, 2 minute exercise program, place a player on the balls of their feet 100% of the time.
Okay.
So that upper core player, when they swing, they're much more of an arms and hands player. Um, Good example, Colin Montgomery, Patrick Reed, Phil Mickelson, Shane Lowry. Those are all upper core players. They're arm swingers. At impact, the arms and hands clear, the hips clear late. Characteristic would be at the top, their plane of the shoulders is more vertical.
Okay.
The club in the downswing is going to cross the shoulder plane, and it's going to point at impact the upper core. The lead knee at impact, at the top of the swing, I should say, is behind the ball.
Okay.
So that's your upper core player.
So,
They use
If I might, and I'm again listening like a fan. A lot of folks listening to this are going, see these guys' swings in my mind. I'm listening to what Dr. Wright's having to say, and all of a sudden, maybe lazily, intellectually, I'm saying these are sort of old school swingers. Am I correct? Maybe my
Absolutely.
assessment there.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, they are. And they're rare. These are not your tour winners as a rule, although you have great players. I just listed.
Hmm.
They're not, we have a bunch when we get to mid-core I'll talk about. They use the ground at the top of the swing, by the way, their target, their center of mass is on the target side. They use the ground rotationally and vertically.
Okay.
We've done a good bit of research using swing catalyst uh, in Culver City with Dr. Robert Giambetti, and he has identified how each of these regions use the ground. So they're using the ground vertically and rotationally. You'll hear people say you're coming out of posture and we want you to stay in posture. No, if you're an upper core player, you
Right.
are going to posture up.
Okay, wait. I'm stopping. I'm laughing if you're watching on YouTube, because if you turn on the internet and you search golf instruction, you're going to you'll hear about early extension, you'll hear about rotation, all this sort of thing. So you ostensibly saying with all your research that for certain folks, that's just it's next to impossible to do consistently.
Absolutely. Well, I tell you, it's an easy way to test.
Okay.
So if purposely, no matter what your core region, if you purposely move to the balls of your feet in a posture position, take your right hand up and stay on the balls of the feet, swing through. At impact, you'll feel that you have to change direction to clear the hips.
Yeah, exactly right.
And that's the posturing up we're seeing.
All right.
It's
Very
about balance. We're coming right back to balance. And when that balance is forward, you're going to posture up.
so then, I'm sort of putting my cart before my horse, but again, I'm just my mind's going here. um let's say a golfer's listening to this and they're like, that sort of sounds like me, and my pro has been telling me to, stay in angles and rotate towards the heels some more. Do you find that one can sort of weave from one station to the next, or do you have to be true to who you are naturally? What's your take comment there?
Well, what we find is that when we identify that player as upper core, we can test and show you have all of your strength in your upper core. We call it actually now anterior, interior, posterior.
All right.
Upper is anterior, so you're forward, and that's where your strength is. We have strength tests. We move you back to the other two zones, the interior, which is the mid, or posterior, which is the lower. You have no power. You have no strength. Your core load has been forward for a lifetime.
Hmm.
That's where you're going to have your greatest strength and your greatest power. Now, if there is an injury that precludes the use of the arms and hands and their better body swinger, we are able to move the balance back through an exercise program so they can play from a different zone. And we can teach them how to strengthen that zone.
This it's just come to me. We're talking from a golf swing perspective. Do you notice some sort of postural tendency with like an upper core guy or girl, or maybe middle core? Is there variation there, or is that a moot point?
No, no, it's a very good point. You're going to see a taller posture,
Hmm.
more spine angle at address,
All right.
and more rotation, more vertical rotation of the shoulders.
Gotcha. So you talked about the test where someone could raise their trail arm in behind them, up on the balls of their feet, and they should be able to swing through, and then you'd back up. Um, what about another way for a golfer to sort of figure out, okay, which camp and I use the term camp loosely, forgive me, which core player am I? Are there tests to that effect, or could you?
Yeah, I can show you one right now, Mark. This is very new.
Okay.
Okay, and it's if you read the literature we're talking about, and I'm not going to go into the details because it will occupy too much time,
All right.
but Fibonacci was 11th, 12th century mathematician.
Mm-hmm.
All nature has symmetry.
Yeah.
And the Fibonacci numbers 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8 show up throughout this research.
Mm-hmm.
Now, every one of us has an 8-inch stance with range that we can access by doing the following. I have a piece of tape. If you can see, I'm going to put it on the first pad up of any finger, this tape.
All right.
Okay, first pad. I take out a yardstick and I'm going to stand up here, see if
All
you
right.
can see. We use a bar and a bungee on the hips to look at hip rotation.
Okay.
Okay. Everyone's going to have hip rotation. But if I stand and I just let my arms, let me move this down a little, let
Mm.
my arms just hang,
Yeah.
and I put my left foot on 0
Yes.
and my right foot on 8, my arms, if I'm an upper core player, my arms and hands will hang the same. I measure my fist. If I go to 7, one hand's going to come in or go back out. My hips are going to rotate left or right. And
Wow.
the position of my arms hang will give me that. So if my hips square at 8 inches with that exercise, I am an upper core player. That's my strength. If they don't,
Mm-hmm.
I go to 10 inches.
Okay.
If they square at 10, I'm a mid core player. And if they score at 12, I am a lower core player. So
This is
we add a we go let's go back to the 8 inches for the upper core.
all right.
So I will be square between 8 and 16 inches. If I do my work, if I get my grip and I play within that zone, that 8-inch zone, my balance is always going to be as soon as you hit this zone, upper core, your weight immediately goes to the balls of the feet. You'll feel everything I just described.
Hmm.
You go to 7, your hips will rotate. If your hips rotate open, your weight will go forward on the right, back on the left.
Okay.
Okay. If I am mid core, my hips will square at 10 inches
Mm-hmm.
and they'll be square out to 18. That's my playing region.
Okay.
And if I'm a low core, I'll square between 12 and 20. We know that the upper core player has the narrowest stance, and your lower core player, they use mostly body. They have the widest stance.
Very, very, very interesting. The so you've described the characteristics, you've explained the test, given some examples. So for the golfer listening to this, and I'm going to sort of go through each region and ask these questions for the fans. Um, the advice that you would now level as an instructor to someone who is upper core, because now look, they wanted to hit the golf ball better, but now this is going to help them to achieve better balance. Um, I'm assuming because of the stance, the distance from golf ball, perhaps golf ball position and that sort of thing, there'd also be a sweet spot, if you will, for each one of these three regions.
Absolutely. We have a way of setting a neutral shaft plane. Uh, there is an angle of the body
Mm-hmm.
that changes based upon core region.
Okay.
It's called the carrying angle.
Mm-hmm.
It comes out of 1865 medicine, but we found that it shows up at address anywhere from 5 to 10 places. We find that through the golf swing, it's another 10. So this angle continues to repeat and it's highly individual
Mm-hmm.
and it's very shallow with the upper core player. So in terms of setting distance from the ball and your grip, you're going to have a weaker grip with the upper core player.
Mm-hmm.
Lower core, more back in their balance, they're going to have a much stronger grip.
Gotcha.
All of these things can be demonstrated, tested, and taught.
Wonderful. Let's you've shared the upper core guys, Shane Lowry. I listed Boo Weekly. He has been on the show. You talked about Colin Montgomery. Um, Typically very reliable ball strikers, even though they're considered arms and hands guys.
Right.
But nowadays there's been this proliferation to be, to use the golfy term, more face stabilization or less club face rotation. So now everyone's talking rotary. But again, I keep going. But Dr. Wright's now said that this would be hard for someone who tends upper core.
Not only that, when we do the research, we found that about in this country, in the US, 66% plus males are upper core.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
I
Interesting.
I am a low core, and we have we look at it in 9 regions from pelvic floor to neck,
Mhm.
and I'm one. I'm in the pelvic floor. Playing baseball, I pitched. I'm going to have the greatest angles. I'm going to have the greatest external shoulder rotation, which is going to give me great velocity as an athlete, as a baseball player. As I have moved at my age, I have been able to my body doesn't move through the ball as well as it used to.
Mm-hmm.
So I've moved to mid-core. And that's not a hard thing to do. If I had, as I said earlier, if I had a shoulder injury or some other injury, I can actually change core regions.
All right, cool. Lovely. Let's go now. We've done the upper core. Let's go to the middle core. Describe the explanation thereof, and maybe some examples, and what the characteristics for that area might be too.
Well, I'll tell you, if we go to low core first, it's
All right.
easier then to come back to mid core
All right, cool.
because mid core uses the ground three ways. The upper core uses the ground rotationally and vertically.
Mm-hmm.
Your lower core uses the ground laterally
All right.
and rotationally.
Gotcha.
So they're at the top of the swing, their center of mass is trail side. A good example would be Dustin Johnson's great example, strong grip, clearing the hips through. They use the body.
Mm-hmm.
The butt of the club, as you see at the top of the swing, the lead knee goes almost straight out in front of the ball.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. At the top, there's a pretty deep hip turn, but it's a wider stance. And as they turn through, the hips clear. It's a body swing. This is the rotary you were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare. These players are very, Jordan Spieth.
I've got your. If you're okay, I've got your article. Yeah, I can put this up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You
Give
can
me one
show that.
second. For the folks on YouTube, you can have a look at this. Let's do share screen.
So your lower core players are rare. You're going to find.
Let me find the right
Yeah,
area.
you're going all the way down to the bottom there. There,
All the
that's.
way down to the bottom. Okay.
Yep.
So what I'm doing for the audio listeners now is I'm just scrolling through. There's an awesome article on rightbalance.com describing the area, and here is the lower core characteristics. And there's a picture of Dustin Johnson. It looks like approaching the top of the swing. And here's a few areas if you just want to look through those and describe.
Yeah, if you look at Dustin, you can see that wide base lead knee is coming straight out.
Mm-hmm.
You can see how far his shaft lean is. That's another characteristic. That butt of that club's going to be off center of the lead thigh.
Yeah.
It looks very tall here. If you look at Dustin in the bottom left picture, he looks tall. But
Yeah.
as he starts his downswing, he actually sits down.
Yeah.
And that's not shown here. Sits down, and you can see the clearance of the hips at impact and where that butt of that club is pointing.
Yeah.
Much more lower core.
For the viewers, you can see where I'm moving my cursor over here. Down here too, you say other examples are Brooke Henderson, Hideki Matsuyama, Billy Horschel, and I can see there is the wide. If you look at Horschel, he's been on our show. There's definitely the wider look in the stance there, and you talk about the sort of stretch to squat move, and you talk about how golfers use the ground. Well, ground reaction force is a thing now, and everyone's talking about, well, you got to stretch in the backswing, go to the squat. But again, am I wrong in understanding you whether not everyone can do that well?
Yeah, it should be very natural, and it's part of the body. It's part of their DNA makeup. You can see there it's Tommy Fleetwood, Jordan Spieth.
It's same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, all the same thing. These are rare players, as I said. You'll see, again, we measure external shoulder rotation as you started to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And that external shoulder rotation is going to be greatest in these players. And you can see if you go down a little bit further, see the balance point.
Mm-hmm.
That also shows this is a bit, the balance is very accurate that you see here, right over the center of the arches.
Right.
And if your listeners, viewers, go back, move the center of their weight, move their weight over the center of the arches, and they take that trail arm and get in their posture and turn, they'll notice how easy it is to rotate the hips from this position.
All right.
Everything we do, Mark, is balance. We don't teach positions, we teach setup.
Yeah.
And out of balance with the correct sequencing, and there is a correct sequencing here we haven't even talked about for each of these regions. With the correct sequencing, you'll be in balance and you'll use the body as it was intended to be used for your core region.
Well, I'd love to touch on the sequencing if you're so inclined, because as I look down these,
Absolutely.
Fleetwood, you talk about guys being open, Spieth through contact. Hideki, Billy Horschel, goodness gracious, Dustin Johnson. Talk about the sequencing some, please.
Okay, upper core player, as they start to swing back, the hips and shoulders move together.
Okay, all right.
Okay, lower core player, the shoulders start to swing back. There's a little bit of a resistance in the lower core.
Mm-hmm.
And the mid core player, let me back up. I misspoke.
All right.
Okay, let's go back to that upper core player.
All right.
That upper core player starts back with the hips, not everything together,
All
as
right.
I just mentioned. They start back with the hips, shoulders follow. The lower core player starts back with the shoulders, just the opposite.
Yeah.
And the mid core player starts everything back together.
Combination. All right. I'm looking at Cameron Young. I'm trying to toggle through here to get to the different areas, folks. It's a whole lot of cool image and reading there. I'm gonna close the screen so we get back to it. So you've described the sequencing of it now too, and the stance width variable. Now we've got essentially the poles of it with the upper and the lower core. Now the middle core. You talked about how everything sort of works more together off the golf ball. What other characteristics can the middle core folks see as it pertains to swing width, where the balancing areas in the feet, and of course, obviously the hands and the grip?
The balance is just behind the balls of the feet, forward of the center of the arches.
All right.
The backswing, we have more of a the lower core has a very level rotation of the shoulders. The mid core is in between the upper and the lower. Everything's in between.
All right.
The mid core player uses the ground rotationally, vertically, and a bit linearly. If you look at their center of mass at the top of the swing, they're right over the pelvis. The lower core players over the trail side. Upper core player is center of mass is more target side. But if you look at that mid core player, they're rotating right over the ball. Not much lateral movement at all.
Examples of those I've written down here. These guys have all been on the show. Ernie Els, my brother
Yes.
Trevor Immelman.
Yeah, Trevor's there.
Colin Morikawa has been on here too. And now that you say that, I can sort of see, if you get away from the aesthetics of the swing, maybe the rhythm or something idiosyncratic, I can see how they fit into the same movement pattern in terms of how they move around throughout their golf swing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the plane of the club bisects the arm plane in the downswing and points to mid-core at impact.
That's very interesting there, because I did read that and I wanted to ask you about that, because everyone talks about the presentation of the club through impact, and you talk about the upper core has the club shaft looking more towards the upper area of the core, and the lower core it's looking lower, and the mid core is up in the middle. Yet most golf instructors, and I stand accused here, I want everyone to get the handle lower through contact because it helps to square the face. So I'd love your commentary there, please.
Well, all I can say, Mark, is if you stay with the range, the dominant region, this is what shows up. If you look at, and one of the things we didn't talk about is release of the club.
Please do.
Through impact, and your upper core player releases very quickly, exits left very quickly.
All right.
I mean, for years I taught as a low core player, as an instructor. I think most of us as golf instructors teach what we do when we begin. Exactly. Well, it's got to be right. It works for me. So I was working. Hogan was my Bible. That Hogan's book was my Bible. Get those hips through. And I have a lot of walking wounded at 30 years past, and actually 20 years past, until we began to understand that all of this comes out of balance. All of it comes out of setup, and it goes into. It sounds simple, and it is simple, but the orientation of the grip. If you get too strong a grip, your hips will open or close. If you get too weak a grip, everyone has a grip that fits their body. When you go into that 8-inch range we talked about earlier and how to determine it, your arms and hands will hang exactly the same at your side. If you are in an 8 to 16-inch range where your hips square, you'll be on the balls of the feet. If you are in that 10 to or 12 to 20, your weight when you add knee flex will be over the center of the arches. And if you are at 10 to 18, your weight will be just behind the balls of the feet, forward of the center of the arches. And that is very predictable. That's science. That's Fibonacci. That's a symmetry of the body, and it's so simple to demonstrate.
It's that to me. I can hear a number of instructors. Yours truly is going to go out there with my yardstick and be measuring widths of stance. The width of the stance, is this between the insteps of the feet, or what is the width?
Center of each foot.
So,
Center of each foot. So the middle of my lead foot to the middle of my trail foot.
and so you measure that, and you basically look for where the hips square up as the golfer is in posture, and then you get a predictor of who they are.
Exactly.
And then
And you want to make sure you do that without a club. As soon as you introduce a club, you're going to see a rotation of the hips if the grip's off.
And okay, if the grip's off, so then you adjust the grip as needed, because again, now I'm sitting here accused, very much so for the folks watching. I feel marginally embarrassed, because the ball starts heading off the right, and professional golf instructor cranks the left lead hand over and the trail hand under to help square the face. But then you're getting in amongst the weeds with what this golf is able to do physically, naturally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're working against their strength. And again, if I'm giving a lesson 25 years ago and I'm trying to get a player to clear their hips, a male, 66% are going to be arms and hand swingers.
Yeah.
I am really working to help destroy this player's game.
You know what? But on the other side of that observation, because I've long contended. I learned from John Jacobs, amongst others, back in the day, and legend. He was like a human launch monitor, and all I learned from Mr. Jacobs was, all right, ball follows club face. So if you can orientate that club face and path well, you can hit functional golf shots. And so it always appeared to me that most golfers were just arms and hands people. That's why I bristle a little bit at trying to get just club golfers to rotate, because first off, they can't because of our sedentary lifestyle largely. And then secondly, that none of them can square off the club face well enough to do.
Right.
So I was like, well, we'll stick with the arms and hands thing. But then now you've proved that 60% of all golfers, 66% are that way inclined because they're upper core.
Right. And by the way, John Jacobs is one of my favorites. I just wrote a review article for a golf journal on his work. And Peter Green, by the way. I don't know if you're familiar with Peter.
No, I'm embarrassed to say I'm not. Do tell, please. So I can
Well,
go.
Peter was simply a protege of John Jacobs
All right.
and worked extensively with him.
Mr. Jacobs, I had one interaction with him. It was at the British Open. I was a young golf instructor, and I was armed back then with my Sony Handycam, so I was all business. And the golfer in front of me was hitting it all over the joint. And Dr. John walks past, and he just looks for a while, very genteel man. And the player said to him, "Would you have a look?" Sure. And he has a look, 3 swings, whispers something to him. Balls are like rockets, straight down the middle of the range.
And he just made an adjustment of the grip, I think.
Very slight. And he
Yeah.
comes to me and he goes, "Son, you're looking in the camera, you're looking in the wrong place." I felt about this tall, but that was essentially the watershed in my golf teaching career. I became a better golf teacher then, because then instead of like trying to compare swings and stuff, I started to look how the ball travels and the influences of ball flight before anything else. And this was before the advent of the launch monitor.
Yeah. Well, in that review, I talked about a lot of this. I'll send you a copy of it if you're interested, Mark. But we talked about, I've used launch monitors, the swing catalyst, looking at how the ground is used. I've used everything in research, but I use none of it in teaching. I believe that taking that to the lesson tee, we lose track of everything you just described.
Yeah, so true. All right, for the folks, I've got that article. I want to find somehow where I can just direct them to the URL to go and see it, because you do a beautiful illustration on there of golfers, of examples of where the balance point and the feet are, where the appropriate areas to grip the club in the hands are, and then obviously the distance from the ball falls in there. You talked about how the upper core golfer releases the golf club. Talk quickly about that. The because I don't think we did. The
Yeah.
middle or the lower and the middle core player release the club, because I
Well,
fear
when
nowadays too many golfers are dragging handles of golf clubs. Really.
right now, so your lower core player is going to release down the line.
Okay.
They are not, and that is something again I try to get all golfers to do. Let's get more down the line.
Mhm.
That's your lower core player. The hips are clearing, and the club is going to be down the line.
Yeah.
And your mid core player is more at a diagonal. Uh, and I have ebooks on all of this. Happy to share with your listeners, your viewers.
Well,
If
let's do that, because I've kept you for a long time, and there's a lot that people can still learn. Obviously, they can go to the website Right Balance. That's right, WRIGHT balance.com. They can become certified if they want to via the
absolutely
website, correct?
right.
Share where folks can find maybe the social media or certainly the ebooks, please.
If you go to instructions.rightbalance.com,
Mm-hmm.
all the ebooks are there.
Awesome.
They're welcome to go through them.
Uh-huh.
Instructions.rightbalance, spelled with a W.com.
Right.
They'll find all the ebooks there. Anytime I'm building a new ebook or I'm getting ready to go do training, those are the ebooks I build, and then I use those in my training.
Tremendous.
So they'll have access to a wealth of information.
I want to ask this. I asked this question to not all my guests, but certainly those that kind of spur me and challenge me as a golf instructor and obviously as a podcast host. Not necessarily giving the fan or the viewer or the listener marching orders, but give them the parting shot. Say, okay, I'm Dr. Wright. I've given you all this information. What would your parting shot to the fans be, please?
Most of your work's going to be done indoors. Most of your work's going to be done on setup. Most of your work, if you look at being able, when you're in the proper position and you work on waggle, why would you want to do anything else? Go hit balls and maybe find that Johnny Miller called it wood works only one day.
Yeah.
And you could be working on all of this at home. Most of your work should be on setup, should be on stance width, on posture, on grip. Posture we teach last, by the way.
Okay.
A grip would be extremely important, and much of this you'll find online.
I'm going to sneak in one more thing. You talked about your books and such. I found an article on in the golf magazine by you, and it was the body optimization move, or BOM. Can you
Right.
share that quickly before I let you go?
Well, at address, if you go back and you look at Nick Faldo,
Yes.
and if you go to his 1989 book and he's teaching posture, you'll see when he stands, one hand's turned in, his right hip's higher and his right shoulder's lower.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at, and we all look like that, by the way, before our right balance exercise. I didn't mention that. But
Okay.
so with this kind of posture, you'll see a lot of players with that right hip higher, or trail hip, I should say,
Mm-hmm.
higher at address. So the right BOM, balance optimization move, in the full swing, it's simply at address, rotating the shoulders, pinching the shoulders toward the sternum, and then relaxing. That absolutely squares up everything in the hip line. With the putter,
Yeah.
it's just the opposite. If you hold a putter up in front, and you'll see that that face is rotated left or right, bring the putter back towards your navel,
Mm-hmm.
pinch your shoulder blades together, let it go. You'll feel your hips have squared and that putter face is dead square. Those are biomechanical isometric moves,
Yeah.
and they're band-aids, by the way. They are band-aids, but they work.
Well, along with that, it's a very cool article for the balance optimization. You essentially, for the folks listening, you kind of squeeze the shoulders internal, really towards the sternum, and then
Full
you
swing.
say, take a deep breath, and then as you breathe out, then you pull the shoulders back and down. And I tried this before I called you, and everything squared up. It was the most uncanny thing I've ever seen.
Now that's full swing,
Yeah.
and the putter is just it's pinching the shoulder blades. The reason I mentioned Faldo, if you look at Nick Faldo's posture, he
Mhm.
had a bit of a rolled back. He didn't have that straight back we all used to teach.
Yeah.
And I believe how he played was he was getting that optimization move. That's speculative, but I think that's what he was doing. As I went back and looked at, in particular, if you look at his '89 book on winning golf, where he stands and he's about to teach posture, you'll see the internal rotation of his lead hand, his right shoulder down, and with the sweater he has on, you can actually see the right hip is higher.
Mhm.
If you look in a mirror, you'll see that in most of your students. If you stand behind, many of your students are going to have that trail hip higher.
Yes.
Now try and rotate around that. We have a 2-minute exercise program once you have your measurement that levels the hips, levels the shoulders, takes care of all of it.
I'm going to clip this and send it to him. He's a friend and a former colleague. I'll get his take and I'll let you know as I find out. This has been fascinating. I've had so much fun. I'm so thankful to you for joining us, and I really appreciate your time and all of your research that you prepared to share. Thank you, Dr. Wright.
Mark, thank you. It's been a pleasure.